uploaded to the Thank you. This will be uploaded to the CapShare website, which is then available for people to download and watch whenever they would like to as well. Thank you, Arani, for this. The CapShare project, just as a brief overview, that means building bridges of shared capacity between scientists, policymakers, and communities. And this is our third workshop, which is where we're focusing on scientists collaborating with communities and policymakers. And you can see the recordings of the previous two workshops if you would like to and are interested afterwards on the CapShare website. The program is very international and also includes a lot of partners and associated partners, those of which you can see here, who are involved in the project, which is funded by Interreg, NPA, Northern Peripheries, and Arctic. The overarching project aims of CapShare is to strengthen the relationship between scientists, policymakers, and Arctic communities, especially in the field of biodiversity and climate change mitigation. The idea is that we should be able to build capacity for decision making around this field because it is, of course, of global importance, but often not prioritised amongst both policy members, community members, and scientists because there are so many other things happening. The way we will do this is to develop a model for effective collaboration. So through these workshops, we gather ideas on how we can build capacity, what it is that we would like to see, and showing the cases of excellent policy, science, and community overlap, such as we're going to show today. And then we have an emphasis on youth empowerment and the recognition of Indigenous and local knowledge in all of the projects that we take place. So I just wanted to give a bit of an overview on sort of the way that scientists can collaborate with communities and policymakers before we dive into our three excellent case studies. So firstly, the first way is through scientists communicating directly with community members. And so quite often a way of doing this is through the youth. To sort of foster the next generation of scientists. So this is something that Arctic Frontiers does quite closely with the Northern Norwegian Science Centre, who are some associated partners on the project, and they're also on this call. And then also taking science to other communities, not only young people, but perhaps business owners, people who are within the community who are maybe just not aware of the science. That can also be something like health providers too. So science to communities, being able to communicate effectively is important because science is publicly funded in many cases, and therefore we have a need as scientists to be able to communicate why we are spending this money, this public money. And education is also a key for building competence and capacity. We need to ensure, however, that science is communicated differently because different groups have different needs. But it does stimulate social discussions and debate, especially around topics such as climate change and biodiversity. We need to ensure there is evidence-informed decision-making and ensure that there is trust being built between policy and decisions. It can also battle misinformation, especially around topics that we see where a lot of misinformation is happening. It's important for everybody to have all of this information in a community. Then there are ways that scientists communicate with policymakers. This can be both scientists who give information to policymakers within the Arctic and outside of the Arctic. Within the Arctic, it is still important for scientists to communicate their science to other local policymakers, such as on the municipal level, mayors or policymakers, but also up to the national level as well. And then also sharing Arctic knowledge to non-Arctic states who governance and diplomacy and science in the Arctic as well. This is important because we really need evidence-informed decision-making. We need decision-making that is based on the facts, and that is what comes from science and local knowledge. We also need to still identify the gaps in knowledge and infrastructure so that those policy members are able to allocate resources and funding so that we can fill those gaps. Management is an important part of the policy process. Management is, for instance, something like the environmental protection agencies, who are able to take the scientific information and work with the politicians to really actively manage what is happening on the ground. We also need to improve the livelihoods, efficiency, and effectiveness of what's happening within communities and of a national level. And this can include governments, management, funding agencies, regulators, health departments. And it doesn't always need to be sort of Western science that is communicated, but any type of knowledge, especially Indigenous knowledge, should also be shared and brokered between these networks. Then there is also the importance of allowing communities to directly interact with policymakers without sort of having a scientist in the middle. So things like sharing circles or one-to-one meetings are ways where information from communities can be shared to policymakers directly. And that's important because we are giving the power to those who are the ones living in those situations. The power of the voice is very important. And it also puts science into real life situations. It's one thing for a scientist to mention the statistics, but it's definitely important to also hear what really is happening on the ground to local people. We need to have a shift of knowledge from only scientists who have this knowledge to having all of the community members who know these important facts. And the importance of lived experiences also should be prioritised by policymakers. The role of storytelling is particularly important, especially in Indigenous communities. And we also need to make sure that we hold policymakers accountable. They need to be making the decisions that impact the communities in the right way. So that is all I will mention about as the topic as a whole. And I will now leave it up to the experts. We have three fantastic speakers with us today. Firstly, we have Skuli Skulason, who is a professor in evolutionary biology at Hular University and the Iceland Museum of Natural History. Then we have Delphine Ruchet, who is the founder and director of RISA Citizen Science and has a lot of background in nature conservation and working with communities. And then finally, we have Marit J. Hieta, who is working with the Sami University of Applied Sciences and UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, on her doctoral thesis. And I'll say it's fantastic to have these three speakers because they really show fantastic case studies of science to policy, science to communities, and science to policy and communities together. So I think that this is a really great way that we will be able to understand a bit more about how we can build capacity with biodiversity. One thing I just want to do now before I introduce our first speaker properly is to just let you know the questions that we will have in the discussions afterwards. We will show you these again. You don't need to write them down or remember them, but just so you can start thinking as you're watching these presentations, what sort of questions it is that we're going to discuss with you after. So what strategies do we have so that scientists and knowledge holders can engage in communities? Is that working? Are there limitations or challenges? If you are a scientist, what is it that you would like to be able to do to engage with communities? If you work at the community level or if you're a knowledge broker or museum, what is it that you would like to do more of? And what are some of the place-based solutions that we have for being able to share better our knowledge between community scientists and policymakers? Is it inclusive enough? How can we do better to make it more inclusive? How can we actually implement these action plans and then elevate them from very local level to more national level? So these are the questions that I will pose to you. I hope that gets your brain thinking. And I will stop sharing my screen and introduce our first speaker. Professor Skulason is a professor in evolutionary biology at Hular University and the Icelandic Museum of Natural History. He has experience in implementing science into policy and working with stakeholders at the local, national and international levels. And he will be talking about his experience with the BioDice project, which is Biodiversity in Iceland initiative. So Skuli, please we welcome you to the stage. Thank you very much.
Yeah, many thanks. And I'll share my screen now. Have some slides. Can you all see this now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this good introduction. It saves me time also. So I'm representing BioDice, which of course includes many people, including my co-authors. It's a big group or network about biodiversity in Iceland that I'll introduce more formally later on. But we are really, really happy to be a part of CAPS here and this meeting, of course. But in a presentation like this, and I come from the perspective of science to some extent, like was introduced. We'd like to start by just looking at the big picture of the global emergency, which is characterized by biodiversity loss. Just draw attention to the seriousness of these issues we're talking about, which are, of course, based on human activities, mostly from like industrial Western cultures that are really destroying the earth in many ways. And these four main activities are maybe the main reasons and for the biodiversity loss, especially climate change and habitat destruction. And this was summarized very nicely in this report from the United Nations in 2021. this sort of provocating title, Making Peace with Nature, which was drawing attention to the source of this problem. But it also drew attention to the fact that we need to tackle these issues in a combined way. It's, for example, very dangerous to look at climate change and biodiversity as two separate things. They need to be tackled together. So this approach to talk about making peace with nature, of course, the opposite is that we have been at war with nature, like I said, especially the Western world and the industrial countries. And this was emphasized first by Rachel Carson, and talking about suicide even, and Antonio Guterres, the United Nations manager, is repeatedly making the same statements in reports and speeches all up to this present times. And this alone is a very interesting and important message that we need to keep all in mind. Now, needless to say, the United Nations, and I'll be focusing quite a bit on them in terms of international global policies here, is they've been fighting to reverse biodiversity loss and climate change for a long time, and policies have often been failing. So recent discussions, especially the conclusions and the agreement in the coming Montreal 2022 agreement and meeting in Montreal, signed by 196 nations, created a very ambitious plan, to say the least. It's really called for transformative change and focus on well-developed 23 targets for 2030 to meet biodiversity loss in a very multidisciplinary manner, and 4 main goals, which are very ambitious, for 2050. And as you can notice, I'm citing websites that I draw your attention to, that you can look at these things much more closely there. But the sentence below in the italics is a direct citation from this particular website of the Convention of Biological Diversity, emphasizing the concept of ecosystem approach as a way to approach meeting those targets and goals. An ecosystem approach is something I will consider like a red thread a bit through this presentation and come back to it a bit later. But first, I want to introduce BioDice. And yeah, but first, here are the targets just in a snapshot. These 23 targets and the 4 overarching goals that, of course, many of you are very familiar with. These are, as I said, approached in a multidisciplinary way. They combine ecology, sociology, economics, and an underlying sort of ethical, philosophical tone of transformation. And several of these targets touch directly on the objectives and that were emphasized in the beginning for capture and also for BioDice, of course. And in fact, the underlying philosophy of all of this here can be associated with the concept of ecosystem approach that I want to sort of share with you in particular momentarily. But just to underline this seriousness of the transformative view, this I think is particularly important for us that live in these wealthy, well-off societies and need to really think things up again, are these just short citations from the report on this, how humankind needs to transform its relationship with nature, and the message from the Global Biodiversity Framework that in 2050, the aim is really that all people will live in harmony with Mother Earth. That's a very tall order, as we can all appreciate. So to BioDice. So in 2020, a group of scientists, so this originated from scientists, biologists, sat down and developed a network among institutions and individuals about elevating the understanding and awareness of biodiversity in Iceland. So that's where the network originated, but it very soon developed into a much more broader network, not just science, but also of various shareholders in society, mostly like, for example, research institutes, societies, NGOs, and companies. So, and it has really developed as a grassroots organization. And its central aim is to elevate understanding of biodiversity in Iceland and promote the country as a case study. That was the objective in the beginning. This has broadened up quite a bit. And the main 3 pillars of BioDice, as emphasized by this little diagram below, is really to gain knowledge through research of all kinds, as was emphasized in the introduction here, and build channels to mediate those results into education. That's the second pillar. And the third pillar is to work with policymaking. And then we focus very much on the United Nations Global Biodiversity Framework. And we can say that biodiversity was really welcomed, and there was a really great need, clearly, in society for this. So we've been very, very, let's say, happy with the reception and the understanding of the need to do something like this in societies, in communities. And so we've had many, many signups for this, and many institutions have been involved. And so maybe just to say it, that this has included all age groups, many young people coming from Icelandic society, for example, of young environmentalists, old people. It's really been a cutting across society, and really, let's say, satisfying in some ways the whole of society and the whole of government approach that the Global Biodiversity Framework emphasizes. And here you can just see a list of some of the highlights. We had a festival of biodiversity, elevating the concept in Iceland in all sorts of ways, involving art, science, and education. We have had a very good relationship with Icelandic government, as emphasized by these maybe 3 projects that are listed here. We had a conference about ecosystem approach with the Ministry of Food, Agriculture, and Fisheries in 2023. We also participated in a Nordic, or led actually a Nordic project funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2024 to compare the implementation of the targets, TBF targets in Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland. Very interesting project, which is now about to be finished and published. We, of course, participate in CAPSHARE, and currently Biodice has representatives on a policy group by the Ministry of Environment, Energy, and Climate in Iceland to develop a policy in Iceland. So you can see it's an example of how a grassroots organization of this kind can really make progress and filter into these events, and the policy making in particular. So that's just a short introduction to Biodice and how that is operating. But coming from biology, I also want to sort of zoom out a little bit here and talk about biodiversity in general and the special characteristics of Iceland that Biodice emphasizes. Most of these characteristics are characteristics of the North in general. And of course, ice covered the North until 10,000 years ago, anywhere above the 50th degree latitude. So very few species in general of organisms have been able to colonize the North in this very short time. And Iceland, being geographically isolated on top of that, has hindered species colonizations even further. But Iceland is also characterized by very diverse habitats due to volcanic and tectonic natures. And Iceland and the North is characterized by numerous very interesting ecological contrasts through glaciers and oceans and freshwater and terrestrial environments that really open up opportunities for these few species that have been able to colonize to diversify. So biodiversity in the North, and particularly in Iceland, is very much characterized by within species diversity. And now I'm, of course, getting to the subject that I and my colleagues study the most at Polar University for many years. And just to give you some pictures, this really cuts across many organisms, Arctic char, birds, and invertebrates and plants. We see very special adaptations in Iceland, isolated from the continent in these organisms. And here's an example of maybe what I study more than we study, which is a diversification process, where the sort of low competition among species has created numerous ecological opportunities for the few species that have arrived to diversify and evolve into these different habitats and resources. The char, the Arctic fox, the birds here, the cod, oystercatchers, and so forth. Just giving you a snapshot of this. And maybe my special case, this is what I studied, and this is where I did all my graduate work, was on this particular lake in Iceland, which fosters these 4 different varieties of char that have evolved in the lake in the last 10,000 years, occupying different resources. And this we see in many freshwater systems across the North, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Canada, Alaska, Russia, and so forth, and in the freshwater areas. But this also happens in other organisms. And this is maybe the sort of place where I'd like to say that that this is where we lead into the big picture again of what biodiversity really is. Here I'm exploring to you within species diversity, which is really characterizing and controlling this particular large lake ecosystem. So let's then turn to what biodiversity is, how we define biological diversity. And you will notice for the remainder of the presentation that I'll be having yellow, and that's really where the emphasis is, because there's quite a lot of text drawing your attention to it. And the italics, they are always referring to direct citations from the website of the Convention of Biological Diversity for this information. So this particular definition of biodiversity here is well accepted, for example, in the scientific community. And it really emphasizes the diversity within species, between species, and that of within and among ecosystems. A very comprehensive definition. Mind you, we in the past have often just been thinking about biodiversity as species diversity. That's not a good thing to do. And so then I just want to emphasize and sort of ask you to take a deep breath and think about diversity as a concept. It is really the fundamental reason for it, that any systems like ecosystems can function. Without diversity, there can be no systems. There can be no relations of anything. And without diversity, there also are no changes to respond, both in short and long term, for example, to climate change. Systems need to have opportunities, something to choose from. And then finally here, the yellow part, that ecosystems are the foundation of life on Earth. That's something we need to remind ourselves of all the time. Healthy, functioning ecosystems provide clean water, healthy air, habitats, food, medicine, and so forth to our lives, make life possible. And this is where ecosystem approach feeds into the conversation and the discussion. And so I'm kind of presenting that now and sort of making the statement that the ecosystem approach is really, you could say, the philosophical red thread of biodiversity, and the way we underbuild our ways to acquire knowledge, disseminate it, and work with policymakers. And I noticed in the introduction that many of the points that you raised in your introduction were really related to this concept, but in many ways it has gone under the radar. And so that's one reason why we're emphasizing to introduce it here. So I'll just take you through a little story of what ecosystem approach is. First of all, based on these definitions, it's really a set of goals and principles to guide the conservation of biodiversity, to promote the sustainable use of resources, and to ensure the fair and equitable sharing of these resources. So this is really addressing these methods, the three main pillars of the Convention of Biological Diversity that was agreed on in Rio in 1992, very closely related to the ideas of sustainable development, as you notice, because it is cutting across fields and it's cutting across sectors in society. It's a very whole of society approach. But like I said, there are goals and there are certain sort of principles and guidelines, and I'll just mention a few key guidelines that need to be kept in mind when thinking and applying ecosystem approach. First of all, it's proposed that we need to think of ecosystems as dynamic relationships among organisms and their inorganic environment, as it says here, interacting as a functional unit. It's really the healthy function of an ecosystem that we need to think about when we apply ecosystem approach in conservation and sustainable resource use. But we also need to realize that this is a human approach. So what this functional unit, what the ecosystem is in any given project is, of course, shaped by the problem, the nature of the problem being addressed. Is that a forest? Is it a lake? Is it the whole ocean? So it's a scale can be very diverse. And also, it's not really said in this slide, we need to realize that ecosystems are connected. Ecosystems are the functional operation of one ecosystem can be dependent on the functional nature of another ecosystem, like for migratory birds, for example. So we need to think about, and this also draws attention to the intense dynamic nature of this approach and this understanding of nature. And so that's why dynamism is essential. Ecosystem approach recognizes that change is inevitable in nature. In conserved areas, for example, where we need to restore, we are watching change, we are watching processes, and it is attention to these events, these processes that need to be of greater attention for conservation strategies than just the simple definition, conservation of single species. So it's a very much approach taking you away from static thinking about what conservation and nature really is. And here it's again illustrated by the freshwater fish example from all over the north. These are whitefish from northern Norway and Finland, which have diversified in numerous lakes and systems in the last 10,000 years. Char in Iceland, Eurasian perch in Sweden, stickleback in British Columbia in Canada. So talking about dynamism and change, this has happened in 10,000 years or less, and it is really shaping the function of the ecosystems in these cases, because these are all resource-based diversifications of one kind or another. And maybe the highlight of ecosystem approach, and cannot be underestimated and could be a source of a whole new presentation for me, is that humans with their cultural diversity need to be considered integral components of many ecosystems. This is, of course, the core of the ethical moral message. And speaking, and of course, it's opposing this sort of classical dominant view that has been dominating Western cultures in particular. And interestingly, coming from the scientific point of view, we are seeing numerous examples of very good scientists, natural scientists, make these statements. A whole book by this famous ecologist and biodiversity expert, French Richard Leroux, only 2 years old book, emphasizing this, and Edith Third, a molecular biologist in Nature, writing this, molecular biologists, let's reconnect with nature. This is something for discussion. But it's essential to be able to carry through anything related to successful conservation, sustainable use, and sharing of equitable resources. So you can see how it all comes together. And to finalize this sort of introduction of ecosystem approach in this context and related to the philosophy of biodiversity, and I think in many ways philosophy of capture, is that we need then management of systems. Nature needs to be adaptive. We need to realize that we are dealing with unpredictability all the time. And the more knowledge we can acquire through local knowledge and scientific knowledge together, we need to be able to adapt that and able to respond to uncertainties and respond to more understanding and more and better. So laws and regulations need to be adaptive to meet the changed opportunities that we have to do better. And absolutely key thing, but sort of my last slide on this, is that this requires, and this is perhaps the elephant in the room, that management of natural resources needs to be decentralized to the lowest appropriate level. Notice these are direct citations to the website on ecosystem approach by the United Nations. So the closer management is to the ecosystem, the greater the responsibility, ownership, and accountability, and participation and the use of local knowledge. So it's really combining local practitioners, community, with government and policymakers. So local practitioners become policymakers, really. And so we are talking about participatory management in its sort of purest form, we can say. So, and that's something we can talk about and discuss. But this is what is maybe most important to work on now, I think, in particularly our sort of industrial societies, to develop this. But so I said before that I can say that the nature of biodiversity, the philosophy of biodiversity is characterized by recognizing humans as part of nature, by recognizing the dynamic nature of ecosystems when we approach discussion, both research, education, and mediation to policy, that needs to be emphasized more and more. Simply, as an example, the importance of within species diversity. So I'm not going to go any further now, and I've used my time. So I just want to thank you very much, and urge you to check out the biodiversity website, and you can become members by signing up there. So thank you very much.
you so much, Scully. That was fantastic. And everyone, remember, we're not taking questions now. We'll take questions in the breakout rooms afterwards. So write them down, keep your brain ticking. Because now we have a second presentation of the day from Dr. Delphine Rouchet, who is the founder and director of RISA Citizen Science. Delphine is a field biologist with a background in research and nature conservation. And RISA Citizen Science is a foundation supporting charitable and non-profit conservation efforts based in northern Norway, with lots of projects related to biodiversity, including work with kittiwakes, kelp forests, owls, and working with the national parks in northern Norway. Delphine, welcome.
Thank you, Jenny, for your introduction. And now I'm going to share my screen. I'm very honored, I need to say that before I start, to be invited here and to share this, what we're doing with you all. Okay, do you see my screen now?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me try again. I'll try again. Yeah, maybe this.
That's it. Now we can see.
You can see my presentation. And do you see the full screen now?
Right now, we still see the notes option at the bottom.
Try one more thing. If not, we'll just use this, the PowerPoint. Let me try one more thing. Okay, and here you go. Do you see now the full screen? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. So, all right. So, I was invited to talk about one of the projects we have, but I'm going to start with a very little introduction about myself and what led to what is RISA now. I'm a biologist. Jenny mentioned that I've been working in the field of nature conservation. I've been doing this for about 25 years. And that's where actually this idea of RISA Citizen Science started. After working for different projects, I worked on something like almost 12 or 15 different nature conservation projects in the world, in Western Europe, in Svalbard, in North America, in Central Asia, in Africa. And all these projects, at some point, I realized that they had one thing in common. And this one thing was that we were failing. We were failing at protecting nature. Of course, we had a lot of small victories on the way, but looking into the future and sometimes very near future, we could see that it was the same story repeating over and over, and the loser is unfortunately nature. This is my experience, but I know it's the experience of a lot of people working in science and in conservation, and that triggers a lot of anxiety, fear, anger sometimes. I see a lot of people in science dropping, early career scientists dropping, because at some point you think that you can make a difference as a person, and then realize that your contribution is going to be very limited, and people leave science. That happens. In parallel, I've worked also in the field of, for the tourism industry as a lecturer and as a expedition guide in the Antarctic and the Arctic, and hoping that this work would give me an opportunity to raise awareness, change people's perception by talking about all those topics that are dear to my heart, and only to realize that lecturers and guides who we're called Arctic ambassadors or the Antarctic ambassadors, we were also mainly used by the tourism industry itself, and also part of the problem. So having to face this contradiction between the mission that we have to raise awareness and being part of the problem led me to the conclusion that there was something that I had to try, something else that I had to try to really make a difference. And I was also aware that I was working with small groups, people who were sharing my concern, my interest for nature, but I wanted to be more inclusive in those projects. And so that's when I started working on this idea of engaging the population, the public, both tourists and locals, trying to make tourism more regenerative. I live in Tromsø. There's a lot of tourism here with Northern Lights, with whale watching, and mostly people come to Tromsø to consume commercial products. So it's a very nature-based tourism industry. Is very extractive. So mainly what the tourism industry is converting nature into profits, and there's no giving back much. So the idea was to actually use the tourism industry as a resource, so turning this concept around, and a resource that can be profitable and bring benefits to nature, to wildlife, to habitat, natural habitat, and also host communities. Citizen science came up as the most obvious tool, because that is the tool that could allow us to bridge this gap between science and the rest of society. This was a very welcomed idea, because there's a strong incentives for scientists to connect with society, and very often it's a challenge as a scientist to see where do we start, and how do we work with people who don't have a background in science? Can we trust the data they're collecting? And so having a structure that was connecting both science and society, and with a background, I'm talking about myself, both in conservation, in research, but also in the field of tourism, was a relief for a lot of scientists. And that's how it started, connecting science with the rest of society, focusing on projects that are local, with the ambition to surely not to change the world or to change the trend, but at least to have projects, to identify projects where we can make a difference. And when I say we, I'm talking about individuals, but also individuals part of a small community. And in that sense, citizen science, if it brings people in the field to do data collection, to make observations, to restore nature, then it becomes a way to make a difference that you can actually measure, quantify. And that's how it started. So RISA Citizen Science is a non-profit based in Tromsø, and that is exactly what we're doing. This is the website that I'm showing now. It was the homepage before, and we have 9 different projects, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I said I was going to focus on one project in the national park on Ånderdalen on Senja Island, but I would just want to mention some of the other projects, because they give you also an idea about how we connect with, how we engage the public in those projects. Jenny mentioned the kittiwakes, which is the first image that you see on the side. The kittiwake is an endangered, actually highly endangered species in Norway. According to the last publication, the species might go extinct in Norway between now and the next 20 years. And this species is leaving the natural breeding sites in nature and coming into the city, breeding on buildings, and then creating conflicts with the local population, creating a lot of hostility. This project is a way to engage the public into understanding why the kittiwakes are in the city, and to try to find a way to coexist. Those projects, maybe I want to emphasize this point, is that they are always dealing with a problem, and a problem that often is doesn't have a solution, or at least the local authorities don't have solutions to solve. And so it's also a tool for the local authorities to help at least solve some of the problems. We need to coexist with those kittiwakes. They come to Tromsø to find refuge. They're not stealing our food. There's a lot of misconception because they're other seagulls. The kittiwake is a seagull. So it's a lot of raising awareness, but not only that, because we believe that raising awareness is not driving change. It's not a factor of change. And we can see that. I don't think it's a common idea that raising awareness is important. And of course it is the first step, but it's not because we are aware of something that we're actually adapt or change our behaviors or make different decisions. We make different decisions when we start caring. And that's what those projects are about, raising awareness for sure, but also engage the public so that through action, through emotions, through feelings, they can not only know, but also feel and care more about what they're doing. So that's the same story with the kelp. I will just go quickly on this, but we have an issue around the world actually, but in Norway it's very, very obvious that all the kelp forests in the water are gone. We don't know how much. It could be 80%, 90%. Those forests were providing a very important ecosystem services to us humans, but also they were a refuge for a huge biodiversity, 300, 400 species in the kelp forest in Norway. Well, they're gone. They've been replaced by urchins because of overfishing. The predators are removed from the ocean, and then the urchins proliferate and they graze those kelp forests. This is an example where we were very successful in restoring kelp forests by engaging the community, organizing dives once a month where we remove urchins and document the changes in density of urchins, but also the return of life and biodiversity in the ocean. I really want to focus on the one project that Jenny invited me for, so I'm going to jump a bit forward. If I can go to the next slide. Yes. This morning, I will mention just this one at top left corner about artificial intelligence. It's jumping a bit back and forth, but this one, survey wildlife with the help of artificial intelligence. I was in the field this morning with a school because we have just another and the last example of a problem in Norway, that there's a lack of knowledge. There's a knowledge gap when it comes to species in protected areas. There's a focus in Norway in protected areas that is put on protecting the landscape. So creating spaces where people can enjoy nature, go skiing, go hiking, go hunting, fishing. But as a result, there's very, very little knowledge about the species that are in the protected areas. How do we solve this? It's not so easy, but this project brings at least one solution, is to actually develop an app. It's a project that we're doing with Trondheim University and Biodiversity Center in Norway. And we're developing an app that people will be able to use when they are in nature to take photos of footprints, animal footprints in the snow, learning what they're looking at, but also uploading the information, the photos in the database that is open access and becomes accessible to land managers, and slowly filling the gap, knowing a bit better what type of species are there, and also how many individuals are in an area. I'm now going to focus on the last project, bottom right corner, Restore Nature and Map Wildlife in Ånedalen National Park in Senja. So we are now in northern Norway. Senja is a beautiful island that is north of Lofoten. This is a view of Senja. And the national park was created in 1970 with the ambition, again, to protect its landscape and to make sure that the next generations we have a place to enjoy nature, hike and ski. And from that perspective, they've done an amazing job. If you stand like on this photo on top of a mountain and you look around 360 degrees, you don't see any infrastructure. There's no power line, there's no road, there's no light at night. And unlike what a lot of people think, this is a very rare thing, even in Scandinavia and in Norway. There's very, very little wilderness left in Norway. So from that perspective, it's success, but the focus have been put on protecting the landscape. And again, because of that, very little work has been put into mapping the species. in the national park. So there is very little knowledge about the species that are in this protected area. And this, for people coming from other cultures or countries, in my case, North America or Western Europe, it's quite a surprise to have a national park that is 50 years old and that has so little knowledge about the species. So the conservation approaches, it was not the focus until now. But there's also very limited resources. There's only one employee. He's the manager. He's a fantastic guy, but he has a lot on his plate, doing a lot of computer work, meetings, fundraising, so not much time to go in the field and do some conservation. The other problem on the land is the number of visitors. It's a very attractive national park, but until now, there were not many people visiting. This is changing. More and more people travel. People are looking for places that are not famous, because people want to also stay away from the crowds. And the national park is now facing a new challenge, is that they have to deal with the consequences of a very, very strong increase in visitors. So the idea that I brought up to them in 2022 was to turn this model around, where they focus on visitor management and consider visitors as a burden, because people bring litter, they disturb wildlife, they cause erosion. So it's really a negative impact of having visitors. But turning this around and maybe using or giving the opportunities to those visitors to actually contribute, doing something that is going to be meaningful, that is going to be useful for the national park, and things that they cannot do because they're lacking resources, financial resources, or manpower. The idea was very well received, and we started in June 22 by visiting the national park and meeting with the manager, Yngve Birkeland, who showed us around. And this was the first time that we were really in the field. And then the idea was presented to the board, and also very well received. And that's when we started organizing those scouting trips. You see now a view of erosion that is caused by trampling by hikers in the national park along those paths that are actually crossing very sensitive areas. This is peat. So of course, after a few weeks, you can see the effects of erosion. We were invited by Yngve, by the manager, to come one day when they were organizing an event with school and engaging into activities to restore the path. You see a coconut mat, some hammers, and the kids were here for a few hours helping deploy those material, and also becoming aware also that just walking through nature has an impact. And we thought that was a wonderful idea, and that could be a tool that could be useful for the park. This was the first scouting trip with Yngve in April 23. And then we organized another scouting trip, trying to think how we will organize this event with a larger group. Then in July 23, we organized a first pilot with volunteers, and with the goal to, mostly to see if the idea we had was realistic. Can we actually bring volunteers into national park and ask them to map the species and do something about nature restoration? This is not a totally new idea. Other places have been testing it, but it had not been tested in Norway, on the land. And so that's what we did. And the first scouting trip was really successful. We were 5-6 people, and everybody really enjoyed the activities. And we decided to organize another scouting trip in June 24. So that was last summer. This time we were a group of 5, and we had, you see here, the manager just telling us about path restoration. But this time we focused on 2 things: mapping species, and especially focusing on groups that were of interest for the national park. We were looking at bumblebees, dragonflies, and birds. And the other mission we had was to actually map the trail conditions in one section that had been suggested by the manager. So no restoration that time, but mapping the trail condition. And that led to a report, very simple report that we handed to the national park. And the first surprise was to first the number of species that we managed to identify was way higher than we were expecting. But also we realized that we had actually mapped species that had never been observed, or at least not mapped, recorded into the national park. Bumblebees, 2 species of bumblebees, 2 species of dragonflies, but also a species of bird. And that was a surprise, because as a naturalist, it's quite rare to go somewhere and actually discover species that are not new to science, but be the first one to see species that are actually breeding. And the interesting thing is that those species are not actually rare in northern Norway. So that was an indication that there was really a knowledge gap, that even relatively common species could be detected and mapped for the first time. The other work, this is a very short video of the section that we mapped, and we divided the trail into 2 categories. One was the trail in poor condition, so the red color, and the trail in good conditions, with criteria that we decided with Ingve, the manager of the national park. But this led to very useful information for them, because this section was not studied. And we found out that out of those 1,300 meters that we had mapped, only 107 meters were in poor condition. The rest was over almost 1,200 meters. The rest was relatively in good condition. So that was a good surprise, but also useful information for the national park, because then suddenly they know where the little resource they have, where they can be allocated, and where the focus should be when it comes to restoration of those trails. Then this is my conclusion. What did we learn from this experience? That yes, there's a knowledge gap. I said it. We discovered species. We mapped species for the first time in this national park. And the second lesson was that it is possible to ask visitors. Of course, they need to be interested, but to map species. So it is possible to engage the public into contributing to this, to creating knowledge for the national park. And that was a good lesson for us to see that it is possible also to be in nature, to visit a national park, and not to be considered as a burden, and to contribute to the conservation in very, very tangible ways. The other lesson we learn is that we need leaders that are skilled within the group, and that is a way to engage people who don't have the expertise. This is very, very important, because then it's very inclusive, as long as you have in the group someone who has the expertise in identifying birds, for example, and then the others can learn and also feel useful and contribute. The next step is going to be the restoration. Now we've mapped, we've identified, we've mapped species, we've mapped the trail conditions, but now the next step is actually to contribute to the restoration of those trails. And this is what we will be doing next summer, is to go with a group and to focus on the actual restoration of those trails that we've mapped and needs to be fixed. And additionally, and that's a small benefit, but we took a lot of photos, a lot of videos, and it's also a way to produce material for the national park that they can use to communicate and promote their mission to preserve the nature. I want to say one more thing, is that this project is drawing a lot of attention and a lot of interest from the local community, and especially the municipality, so Senja municipality, because they're also saying that, of course, now we're focusing on the national park, but potentially with this increase of the number of visitors on Senja, and the concern they have that Senja will become maybe like the Lofoten that are much more popular, they will have they have new challenges, new problem to solve. And if they can use even a small portion of the visitors coming to Senja to actually do something that is beneficial for nature, then there is also an interest to do that outside the protected area. And I will finish with just 4 bullet points, because I think from my perspective, we have new goals with this project coming up next summer. The first one is to develop opportunities for the youth, the local youth. There's a problem in Senja, in a lot of rural areas in Norway, but I would say around the world, is that the youth, the young people are leaving those places because they want to go where their jobs, or they are going to university and then they don't come back. And so there's a drainage, or the youth is leaving, and that is a problem for society. And so we hope that we will manage to engage the young people who are from Senja in this project, to develop a sense of ownership, to develop a sense of pride for what they accomplish. And that will, at least for some of them, give them a reason either to stay or to come back and accept responsibilities to take care of the place where they grew up. And the second thing is, we're observing that a lot of the expertise that some of us had with birds, with bumblebees, also with nature restoration, it's something that is owned by only a few people, and very often people who are older and not necessarily in those areas. And so we really want to encourage people to acquire, or first to get interested and then acquire this expertise, to have it locally. If no one knows how to identify species, then it will remain a problem, because we'll always have to have people from the outside coming to Senja to map the species. The other thing is that we will engage tourists and local people. And this is very important, because we're observing a growing conflict between the tourism industry, visitors, and people living here, and it's the same around Tromsø. And so it is very important for us to bridge this gap and address this conflict by having groups that are mixed, both with visitors and locals. And of course, the main goal is to, in any way we can, to help the national park, and use the resources that are available, in that case visitors, people living there, and try to see how we can help and support the conservation mission of the national park. And that includes a very strong collaboration with them. We're willing to help. We have ideas, we have muscle, we have a heart, but we also need to do something that is needed, and for that, the information is always coming from them. So that's the relationship we have with the national park, with the Senja municipality, is to be listening to what they need, what they want, and then to adapt this through citizen science, and engage the public in doing exactly that.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That was a great overview. Lots of projects ongoing, so very nice to hear. We're running a little bit over time, so I will just say that we can take a 5-minute break now. So if you come back at 11:10 GMT, 12:10 CET, 13:10 EET, then we will resume the conversation and also introduce our third speaker. But just a reminder of the questions: which strategies do scientists and knowledge holders have for engaging in communities? And what are some place-based solutions for knowledge sharing between communities, scientists, and policymakers? So join us again in 5 minutes. Thank you. Excellent overview. Thank you. Of a case study. Marit Hieta is a doctoral research fellow at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, and also the Sami University of Applied Sciences. Marit is a Sami descendant who is based in Sapmi in Norway, where most of her family currently lives. And she leads the SITE project, Climate Change Impact on Terrestrial Ecosystems, which is an innovative initiative from Sami Council and AMAP, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Programme. In parallel with this, she's completing her doctoral studies focusing on co-production of knowledge, engaging closely with Sami knowledge holders. Marit, welcome. You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I will now try to share my screen. Can you now see the full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
So thank you for the introduction. So I can jump straight to the project. It's a co-production study that I have now led for a year. The project started in 2019, and it's funded by Nordic Council of Ministries, and the Sami Council and AMAP are leading the project. So we have worked together with reindeer herders in all over Sapmi, except Russia, to bring together Sami reindeer herders' knowledge and science to address environmental challenges of environmental change on the reindeer herders' daily life and the reindeer. Let's move on. So shortly about Sami reindeer herding, maybe some of you know, but as we see in the map, it's all over Sapmi, from all the way to the southern Norway, all the way to the Russian border in the northeast. So it's a great importance for the Sami culture, employment and economy, and identity also. So here you see the districts. It's going across the borders. So it's a migrating and seasonal livelihood. So the lines here are the districts that the reindeer herders are moving in according to the seasons, 8 seasons total. So lots of area is needed to be able to do the traditional herding practice and migrating practice. Today, the reindeer herding is facing big challenges with climate change and competing land use. So this picture will show you how the cumulative effects of the competing land use is affecting the herds. So first picture is the ideal situation. And then you have the windmills, which will take some of the pastures and also forestry, mining, tourism, and more that is posing challenges on the pastures and the reindeer. So this project, like I said, started in 2019, where a group of reindeer herders and scientists sat together and discussed what are the needs of the reindeer herders and science in monitoring biodiversity and what's happening in the reindeer pastures. And they came up with this project objectives, develop a digital tool for herders to document environmental changes, facilitate mapping of biodiversity, climate impacts, and land use conflicts, and also a very important part, ensure that Sami knowledge is included into monitoring initiatives. So it can serve both the Sami communities, and also the science. And also strengthen the resilience of reindeer herding communities with creating tools that can help them adapt and react to climate change. So like I said, it was a co-production study or method that started with a pilot project already mentioned, with scientists and reindeer herders coming together and discussing what are the needs, what can we actually research, and so on. So identification of participants, also who else identify more reindeer herders. We wanted to cover the whole Sápmi because it's very diverse. We have coastal Samis that migrate to the coast. We have in the woodland Samis, we have on the tundra. So different challenges in different areas of Sápmi. So it was important for us to identify participants all over Sápmi. And we worked together, and trust building was, of course, a very important, very important thing for a successful co-production. So together we co-created a 4-year project and applied for funding and secured funding, and started in 2020 with creating the tool. And also based on the gaps that we also identified, what is already existing out of monitoring initiatives, and how can we complement these. And also created a data management plan. Of course, every research project does that, but for us it was important that the data was completely in the hands of the reindeer herders. So it was secure for them to share knowledge and data, and for them to know that it is not shared and used without their permission. And it's still that way now, and also within the project group. So the tool was tested a year. 9 reindeer herders across Sápmi tested the tool, and we had monthly meetings with feedback where we changed and approved the tool during the test year, and also at the end we evaluated the tool, and now we have a plan to open it up for more users. And it was very important during this test phase to see that, ensure that this tool is useful for the reindeer herders, not only to collect data. Yes, and then of course the digital tool was one of our main outputs, and we also created a story map. Like I said, the data that was collected during this test year is within the group, but we decided to, as a communication tool, to create a story map where we depict more the results or the observations that the reindeer herders thought was most useful to communicate to the outside world. And then I will give you the QR code for the story map later, so you can go and see and explore it. And also we created reports for specific use of the reindeer herders based on what they need in case of discussions with when discussions and meetings with competing land use cases. And also some policy needs emerged in writing this report and during this project. And one of them is that Sami knowledge must be recognized as data. It is very useful because there is so much knowledge there. And also creating these kind of tools that are useful for both is important, both for the reindeer herders to be motivated to put in data. They have to know that it's useful for them. And also international cross-border collaboration is needed because of reindeer herding, crossing borders when migrating to summer pastures and winter pastures. Yes. So a little bit about the tool. We used an already existing survey tool called MapSnare, and then together designed what kind of themes are useful to monitor. So it enables real-time data entry, so they could be out in doing their daily work with the reindeer herd and also put in data on their phones. And like I said, it's open now for broader implementation across Sápmi. And I'll show you some of the themes. So these are the themes: reindeer behavior and health, grazing conditions, and it's a map-based tool. So you could either put a point or area, depending on the types of observation. Snow and ice is important, weather, plants and animals and insects, special events and other. And of course, in these themes are also follow-up questions, like you could put a date and how it affects the reindeer herd now, in the future, and also when you observed this. And you could also add a video and pictures. So it also works like a diary for the herder, so they could go back in time and see, oh, this happened last year, this time. What did I do? How did I react to this event? And then learn from it. So that was a big motivation and wish from the test group to have and to be able to use it that way. And also for the competing land use, we had disturbances, points, an area. What kind is it? Windmill park, tourism, and also with follow-up questions like how it affects now, and also how do you think it will affect in the future. So lots of experience for all of us. We were, of course, to have this kind of project, we are totally dependent on a good collaboration between each part. And it's also very important to be flexible so that each part can participate. So the trust is very important. And for me, as a Sami and also a researcher, I had a vital role in being a bridge between the two knowledge holders. Also because I know the language and would be able to translate the nuances that you don't know, that a translating tool cannot detect. And you know, I know I could read between the lines of different things, so that was very useful. And also, I think by Sami Council being very clear on always having a leader that has the cultural competency would be vital for ensuring that both knowledge systems are equally valued in a project. So of course, conflicting time frame, that was a challenge, but you have to be flexible. And we worked through the different seasons, and some seasons are very busy for the reindeer herders, and we understood that and had our meetings maybe late at night when it's dark, after daylight, and also we were very busy at times when the reindeer herders were not busy. Then we had time to work with the project. So we had to have this flexibility within the group. But of course, when you have funding close to the reporting time, it's very important that all of us were there. It was sometimes happening, but sometimes not. But of course, that is also a challenge with the funding system that is not aligned with a lot of this indigenous livelihoods, and sometimes you have to pull people out of, you don't want to, but out of their daily work to participate in a project, which is not, it is not really that, you don't want to do that, but it happened with us. And of course, funding from the start, where you include all the participants, is also very important. The researchers are, of course, funded through the project, but it's very important that the other participants also are funded, and that's the way we did it. And I think that was what was successful, that we felt equal, and also a responsibility to participate. And the data ownership, like I mentioned, was also that we had it clear from the start who owns the data and how it will be shared, and also the trust that if you want to share the data, it's always asked of all parts. So yeah, that was our project. And here is the QR code for our story map. And I encourage you to go and explore it, because it's very nicely done with all the observations during the test year. Or I mean, not all, but a lot of the observations during the test year are there with pictures. So you can see what kind of challenges reindeer herders are facing in the different seasons, and also in the different areas of Sápmi. You also see that it's different. Sometimes it's a nice winter in the north, and then it's not that nice in the south, and so on. Yes, I think that was all I had. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you. Well, everyone, we've heard our 3 case studies for today. For our breakout rooms now, I'm just going to share what the questions are. I will also write these in the chat. And also I'll pop into the rooms that you get put in the breakout rooms and put these into the chat there as well, because I know they sometimes disappear. So the 2 main questions that we would want you to answer are: what strategies do scientists and knowledge holders have for engaging with communities? Now we've heard a lot more of the strategies, so it's really time to pick the brains of our speakers. And then what are some place-based solutions for knowledge sharing between communities, scientists and policymakers? And this can be in any direction, whether that's policymakers to communities or communities to scientists. What do we need to do better? And in all of these cases, what are the challenges and limitations? How can we elevate what we're doing at the local level to really make a difference nationally and internationally? So we will now be separated into breakout rooms. Enjoy your discussions. I'll post the questions. Okay. Maybe we need to stop the recording first as well, Rani.